Hi, this is Tessa Keogh, and as promised, there's a second Tuesday's tip today because we missed it last week. I thought today we'd talk even a little bit more about master sources. And the reason for this is last week in our community, there was an interesting discussion with over 40 posts about working with sources in legacy. And I realized we just can't get enough about trying to learn and use sources, which are actually our citations, in our genealogy database programs. And that's a good thing. At the same time the discussion was going on, I was busily working on my Tuesday's tip about, you guessed it, even more on master sources. Well, my schedule, I don't spend all my time on genealogy, it just seems that way. And my lack of decent internet access last week while I traveled meant that this one fell by the wayside, only to be resurrected this week. So the Legacy Virtual Users Group community gets 2 Tuesday's tips for this week. Enjoy. But before we get started, a shout out to Becky Wiseman for starting the conversation, and to JL Beacon, Monique Riley, Marla Larson, Melanie Armstrong, Linda McCauley, and Richard Halford for contributing their comments, questions, and suggestions. This is what makes the Legacy Virtual Users Group community work. Ask those questions, share frustrations, make comments, solve problems, and share how you use Legacy. Good on all of you, and keep it up. Now, sources and citations. Some consider them the bane of their genealogy existence, and many are overwhelmed by the choices out there. Do I use basic source or source writer? And what are all those gray areas I have to fill in? Now, stop right there. Once you make sure you understand the reason for source citations, you decide how to fill in those boxes. And remember that no one is standing over your shoulder or grading your work. Say it with me now. You own your database program. It doesn't own you. For those of us who use citations in other endeavors, you may be asking, do I try and follow Evidence Explained, or do I use APA, MLA, the Chicago Manual of Style, the Blue Book, Harvard referencing, the Vancouver system, or some other alphabet soup system? Let's take a step back. You know why you need to cite your sources, and Legacy contains a reference system both in Basic Source and SourceWriter to use what many consider the best practices outlined by Elizabeth Shown Mills in Evidence Explained. So why not make your genealogy life easier and go with the flow? Work with the framework. Remember, it should always be substance over form, and something you will actually incorporate and actually do. Finally, working with your sources, old and new, takes time. Remember to schedule some time to work on your sources and then polish them off one bite at a time. I love lists, as you may have noticed, so here we go. You're going to need to get real and keep a few things in mind, and I have a list here of 7, and make some decisions. You need to answer some preliminary questions, so let's get started. Are you a lumper or a splitter? Whatever you are is fine. But once you make that decision, own it and commit to your inner organization personality. Now, the second one is, how do you see things? Do you think location, or do you think class of documents? And remember, if you think location, not every source is location-based, and plan accordingly. Now, after spending a bit of time working with your sources, what makes sense to you? Basic source or SourceWriter, or some combination of both? If you have scads of sources in your basic source and they're clear and correct, and the question here is, can you find the source from the citation? Can others find the source? And are you able to get back to that source and analyze your work? Once you've done that, don't obsess about switching sources to SourceWriter. If your sources need work, or you don't have many entered, you might want to consider SourceWriter and spending the time to learn how to work with it. Or you might want to keep your current sources in Basic Source and enter any new sources in SourceWriter. Do what works for you, but once again, commit and be consistent. Now, I'd encourage you to think about filling in the text and the comment section in a way that works for you. And remember, you can unclick and not print that information. take the time to learn how to save and load the source clipboard. I'm always amazed when people tell me that they don't have the time to learn their software program. Stop right there. If you take the time to learn your program, you'll actually save time over the long run and you'll have a better work product. So don't ever say you don't have the time to learn something. Now, I use cheat sheets, and don't worry, I never use them to cheat. I use cheat sheets to remind me how I do something. That could be my data entry, my research process for particular websites, how I enter sources or notes for my facts and events, whatever. I am one of those form and substance gals. I want it correct, and I also want it to look pretty. Now, I find the cheat sheet and filling in the text in the comments section a really good way to explain my methodology, both for me as well as any co-researcher I work with or someone who might be using my version of the family file in the future. Now, as you can tell from my master source list, I think classification of documents first, and I like to group them this way. So I'll use things like book, cemetery, census, directory, vital statistics, and then I group by place and where appropriate year. Here you can see my master source list entry for cemetery. It's on Find a Grave. Now, here you can see my master source list entry for cemetery, which is Find a Grave. And something that I do that works for me is in the text comment section, I include a description of what the source is and how I enter data for both the master source and the detail. This is helpful for co-researchers that I share my work with, and it helps me to remember how I did my data entry. Consistency and an easy method to answer that question when I haven't used a particular source in months. So I can go back and say, how do I do that? And it's not going to make me crazy. You can also see that I am most definitely a lumper. My census entries show that I have a master source for a particular census. Here, the Ireland 1901 census. So everyone who uses that census would appear if I click on the Show List tab. And that works for me. I don't want to break it down by province or county because I can easily do that by using the search function in Legacy. And I know that I want to find a cemetery or a census. I never think location until I'm in the actual source. Be sure to take the time to enter your master sources. Here we're looking at the Edit Master Source definition. When I'm entering the master source, I have Evidence Explained, the PDF version, open on my large monitor on the left side and my Legacy program open on the right. Then I make notes and work my way through the source. That's what works for me. Figure out what works for you and do that. Now let's go live so I can show you how I work with my data entry and my sources. A little bit of caution here. This is one way, not the best way or the only way. Now, something that I want to point out right away is if you are new to source citations or you are trying to figure out how other people are approaching it, really go ahead and make use of Google or whatever your browser is, and certainly check out Wikipedia. There's some basic discussion about citations, and Wikipedia mentions a variety of ways that the humanities, the legal field, and the social science fields cite their sources, and they include Evidence Explained in this discussion. I'd also like to point out a really great website, which is Evidence Explained, and there are quick lessons as well as forums, and I think both of these are really helpful, especially if you are wondering about some basics. Quick lesson 1 is analysis and citation. Quick lesson 2 is sources versus information versus evidence versus proof, and those are really helpful lessons to take a look at to get a better handle on citations. But something I found in the forums, and there's the link to that, or you can just follow along. But the person asked the question, they were trying to figure out how they would source it, and Elizabeth Schoen Mills responded and provided some points on what she thought the Evidence Explained version of the citation should include. And you can take a look at that, but the one thing I'd encourage you is take a look at what the conversation is about and what items should be in this source citation, and then work with it to make it work the way that you want it to. Don't ever be following something lockstep, especially if you don't understand why you're doing it. So the conversation went on for a while, and I'm just scrolling you through so you can see a number of people got involved, and take a look and see how you want to address it, or the conversation back and forth might answer some more of your questions. So that's a really good way to approach it at the outset. One thing that I mentioned I was going to talk about was we were going to go live and take a look at our master sources. And so we can do that by clicking right here and then going to Find a Grave. And if we do that, you see how I have it entered. And this is Cemetery Records, Compiled Records, which is a database that's online. Now, something I do differently than Elizabeth Shown Mills is I put in the founder or the owner of the website, and that's Jim Tipton. But the rest of the information is the same. It's a database and images. The website title is Find a Grave. I have the URL. Now, it's been online for approximately 12 years, so I've put in the time frame as 2002 to current. As I mentioned before, in my text and comments, I have the information about the site as well as how I input information for Find a Grave. And you can reference it however you want, and I don't click either of these two boxes, so it won't show up on the reports. The repository that I have is Find a Grave, and it's at that URL. But you wouldn't necessarily need to have that in there. Take a look and see how that citation reads and make whatever changes you want. So we save that. And then here in Show List, if I click on this, it shows me that I have 167 people who use this master source. And if I wanted to scroll through and do any of the work here on it, I could, but I could also check and see who I have sourced here. And these are all people who use this master source, and it's been sourced to them. Okay, so if you wanted to edit any of the individuals here, you could just click on their name and edit right here. But I just wanted to show you that right now I have 167 individuals who use that master source. Now, if I were to go in and perform a search, and I'm going to show you something that I do, and I'm going to tell you right from the outset that this is either going to be considered a major crime or a mortal sin, but this is the way that I do it. I go online and work on a class of documents or some kind of online research, and I group it all together, and I do that research for all of the individuals who it applies to, or I try to at the time. And I might not put all my sources in the perfect source order at that time. I might just be working through a list. And in this instance, I'm going to show you how I do it with Find a Grave. But the reason that I do this is I've input all of that information in the facts and events section so that I can go back and clean up my sources. And I try to do that within a day or two of when I did the research. And this is just what makes the most sense for me, or how I can make the best use of my limited time. So what I have done here with the search function is I've included individual, the event name contains Find a Grave. And then I've added a second condition here, which is that the individual's burial place contains Tecumseh. And for my purposes, there's only one Tecumseh, and it's in Johnson County, Nebraska, but you might have Tecumseh in a number of different states, so in that event, you're going to want to provide more information. But if I do that, and I've cleared the list from a previous search, I can create a list here. And I do that, and I have 47 individuals who are in Tecumseh. Okay? And they're going to be found at probably 3 cemeteries. But one of the major cemeteries they're going to be found at, and I'm going to show you that right here, is St. Andrew's Cemetery. It's in Tecumseh, Johnson County, Nebraska. And that's one of the ways that I do my research. I'll go through by a cemetery and find individual information. For instance, Courtney Atkins shows up here, and he's one of my people. Now, you can do it a variety of ways. You need to work with whichever way makes the most sense to you. You might do it by individuals and go back and forth. Just in an alphabetical order of searching them. You might use string searches to find your people. You might do it by state, and you might do it by cemetery. Do it with whatever method makes the most sense to you. For me, it's working on the cemeteries. So in this regard, I have entered information just by going through the 275 total matches that are at St. Andrew's Cemetery and entered information on the people in my database that would apply to. And what I've done at that same time is I know that I'm not going to be entering the source information at the same time, although it's in my event and fact information. And so I've used a tab, which is 8, and I'll show you something here in advanced tagging. If you take a look at tag 8, find a grave citations necessary. So this is cleanup work. If I have the tag 9 tagged, it says that it requires work. There's either an issue or a source citation that I need to play with. So these two are showing, and right now we're going to be working with 8. So as you can see here, this list contains 47 individuals who are buried in Tecumseh, and I have a number of them that are clicked with 8, and so those are the ones that I have to go back to and make sure that my source citation is correct. So let's go take a look at the first one, and we go to find a grave and we edit it. And what I want to show you is when I was doing the research, I filled in the information, find a grave, the memorial number, the date it was entered by the contributor, and the place. And I do it this way because I always have find a grave and the place is always there, and I can use the repeat key. It just makes it easier. Then at the time that I'm looking at the information, the next thing that I do is I just copy and paste the information that is in the memorial. And that's all this information listed here. Sometimes there's going to be an obituary, sometimes there might be related individuals. Just however you want to include your information is fine. I just copy and paste the entire thing. One thing I do is I make short work of some of the tabs that are set up in Find a Grave. My preference is to have the city, the county, the state, and the country all together, and my preference is also to have the cemetery listed with the burial. So I do a little bit of cleanup on my own, but do whatever works for you. And one other thing that you're going to have to keep in mind when you enter this is usually the name is not included in the information that you can copy and paste, and so I always put the name in. Now, this is an important thing to do as well because it shows up on the memorial entry, and it might be different than the name that you have in your database. And that could be because of nicknames, it could be because of married names, but definitely take a look at that. So this is the information I have here, and then if I were to open the source clipboard, I've been using Find a Grave, and it's right here, and this is the last person that I worked on it. Now, if I opened the source clipboard and Find a Grave wasn't there, because I've worked with saving and loading clipboards, I could always go in here and load the clipboard that I'm interested in. You can save up to 10 clipboards, and that's something that I do. This one here is Find a Grave, so we're already good to go. Now, the item of interest and the kind of information that I put in here is always consistent. It's an entry 4, and I list the person's name, and then I list the memorial number. And I use whatever date that I did the research, so I update that. So in this instance, what I'm going to do is remove the previous information and add Adam D. Clark's name. Now, as you can see, the memorial number is right here. I could just copy and paste that, or whatever your preference is, just type it in. Usually when I'm not talking, as I'm doing today. I'm a pretty quick typist. So I have the entry for Adam D. Clark, memorial number, and I'm going to change this date here. I'm going to override it with today's date because I just did this research the other day. Now, I am going to save this. And as you can see, the source books didn't light up, and that's because I had started out with opening the source clipboard. If I come down to add the clipboard source to the event, the information I just typed in shows up. And I also use prompt for detail so that I can always just check my work. So in this event, I have this information here, and I'll tell you, I've never really worked with surety level just because I left everything pretty much at 0, and I can go back and change that, as a batch change if I want later. So right now on the prompt for detail, I'm saving this, and then it lights up, and I know that I have it checked. So I have also edited my event sentence definition, so it reads that the memorial number, which is the description, for Adam, I just used their first name, is located in the place, and it appeared on the event or fact, and it was added on the date that's listed there. So that sentence with the source citation gives me all the information that I need about this. And then the notes section, which is right in here, gives me all of the information that was added by the contributor. We save that. Now that it's been sourced, I unclick it and I move on to my next one. So this is how I work through the approximately 16 find a grave pieces of information that I got the other day when I was doing research. Now I want to show you that if I were to do a chronology report, what it actually looks like if I have something from Find a Grave. So if I take a look at that report, now keeping in mind that I'm going to need to play with page information later, but the date is listed in there and everything is done in date order, and the Find a Grave is certainly going to be after they've been buried and somebody's looked it up for us, some kind individual. So that date shows up. The event name is Find a Grave. It's listed by the area, but I can always flip that around so the town shows up first. The memorial number, the information is all there, who it's created and or maintained by. If we were to take a look at the source citation, it's number 9, and it's right in here, the database and images, Find a Grave, the URL, when I accessed it, the entry for the person, and the memorial number. So if I ever wanted to go back and look that up on Find a Grave, I could also do that. And let me just show you that. You can do that search. And let's see if it works. And there is Lawrence E. Murphy. So someone with this source citation could bring up this same information that I've added before and also make a note of the fact that there's a photograph of the tombstone. So that's how I work with it. And hopefully that gives you an idea of how you might want to work with entering your sources. And I would really encourage you, as I mentioned before, to just focus on the system that works best for you and realize that Legacy and Evidence Explained have really kind of worked hand in glove on source citations in SourceWriter, but you need to use that system in the best way for you. So as you can see, I made a decision that I'm a lumper. I made a decision that I work with classifications of documents better than location. I made a decision that I wanted to work with SourceWriter, and I use Evidence Explained. I do fill in the text in the comments section for my benefit so that I understand what the class of documents is as well as how I do my data entry. I spent some time and learned how to use the source clipboard, and I have saved and loaded various source clipboards for ease of entry. And my cheat sheet is actually maintained in the text and comments section so that I'm hopefully as consistent as possible. So those were the 7 things I kept in mind and the decisions I made to work with my citations. Now, as JL Beacon posted last week, there's a limit to how many years I'm going to sit bent over a keyboard. So do a little planning. Think about how you want your sources to look and how you want to work with your sources. Make a thoughtful decision and proceed confidently. Don't worry it to death and don't second guess yourself. Finally, don't spend your time constantly revamping your work. Have the big picture in mind and get back to that ancestor hunt. So there you have it. Now let's hear from you. Please post in the Legacy Virtual Users Group community how you enter your sources, or if you have any suggestions to make this type of data entry easier, quicker, or better. I'm always happy to improve upon that wheel. I just don't always want to be reinventing it. So until next week, thanks for joining us here at the Legacy Virtual Users Group community.